So, well, join me in Matthew chapter 14. We're at the halfway point. We are finally there, halfway. 28 chapters in Matthew. I wanted to wait till we got to mid 14 before I said halfway. So we're here. We're getting there. And Matthew is again presenting Jesus, right? He's presenting the good news. Each of the gospel writers with very specific intent presenting Jesus the Christ. And Matthew, he's the king. He's the son of David, the son of Abraham, Messiah, son of God. And so he presents him to us. We're at this spot in Matthew where we now, in the midst of 14, beginning in verse 13, we encounter a miracle again of Jesus. Now, Matthew is not making a case here now, I don't think, for miracles in the context of his identity. I think that's been given to us. I think he lays that out for us in chapters 8 and 9, the 10 miracles after he comes down from the mountain. What we see here is a miracle, maybe one of the most famous in all of Scripture. You don't even have to have been around the Bible. You don't have to be a believer in Jesus Christ. You've heard of this one. This is the feeding of the 5,000. It's the way we refer to it. But by the time you get to the end of the account, you find out that it really wasn't 5,000. It's 5,000 men and women and children. And so you need to kind of process that in your mind. While we don't have an exact count, you're probably looking at somewhere between 15 to 20 to 25,000 people who are gathered here, and he is feeding. And he feeds them, or the disciples feed them. This miracle has a mark of uniqueness to it. Bear this in mind. It is the only miracle of Jesus during his public ministry that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. The only one. Now, of course, the resurrection is in all 4. And we see that, obviously, in all 4. But in terms of his public ministry and the miraculous deeds that he's doing, only this one is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John they record. At the very least, this says that this particular instance, this particular miracle was significant as part of their storyline. It's significant for Matthew. It's significant for all of them. And we will leverage all 4 today. I love that. When you read the Bible, the Gospels in particular, read where there's multiple accounts. You'll find that regularly in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But here we have it in all 4. Read and make the storyline and put it together and be challenged in your mind, in your heart, as to what's going on. What is he teaching us? Why is he doing it this way? Thanks to John, we know that this is at the 2-year point in his public ministry. He mentions that during this time, when this miracle happens, when this feeding takes place, it is Passover. It is the time of Passover. The next Passover would be the cross. He's been doing public ministry now for 2 years. Chronologically speaking, though none of them are all that concerned with chronology. That's not usually their main emphasis point. We're a little more wound up about them than the mindset of the Middle East author, for example. He's at this 2-year point in his ministry, walking toward the cross at this point. Now listen, there's lessons here. I would encourage you and challenge you to think deeply about what this miracle is about. And I would immediately say to you that it's way more, there's way more going on here. This is much, much less about bread and bellies, full bellies, than it is something that he's doing. I don't even think Matthew leverages it as a context of pushing identity. That's usually what his miracles are for. He's the one John uses this miracle that way. It is this miracle that flows into Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. Out of this miracle. God the Father gave manna from heaven. And now he gives manna from heaven again. And he says, it's me. There's more going on here than bread. There's more going on here than identity. This is a teaching miracle. This is a miracle that he does, that he uses to teach his disciples with. This one and the next one. They are, with no doubt, aimed at his own. Yes, there's a blessing. Yes, there's things going on in the midst of it. But he's doing something with his own. This begs the question of how God moves you through when he puts something that's absolutely impossible in front of you. How do you respond when you are asked to do that which by all reasonable assessments cannot be done? And I'm not even exaggerating. I want to actually say impossible. I don't mean highly unlikely. I don't mean improbable. I mean impossible. That when you set your hand to something and God's glory is at stake, and he calls you to do something or to endure something, that there's no way possible for you to do it by any natural means. What kind of a response does he want from you? What does he expect from you? What is he trying to teach you? How is he moving you through that? Now, I'm not talking impossible in the way we think, you know, it's impossible to win the lotto. Well, pretty much. Pretty much. We craft things for ourselves or aim for goals that are essentially so unlikely, so improbable that they're in essence improbable. I want to be the very best at this in the whole world. Well, chances are that isn't going to happen. I mean, somebody's the best, but it may not be you. I want to be the richest. We craft all these things that may seem unlikely or improbable. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about God when he brings you into something or puts something in front of you that he calls you into that is absolutely not possible to do by natural means. What is he doing? And how is he doing it? And what does he expect from you? What did he expect from them? That's this miracle. It's a teaching miracle. It's a test miracle. Matthew chapter 14, verse 13, John is dead. John the Baptist has been executed by Herod. And Jesus finds out. That's the beginning of this text. Don't turn Jesus into some kind of two-dimensional character. This hurts. He loved John. And when the news comes in, he wants to go be off alone away from the crowd. Now, when Jesus had heard this, verse 13, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. Now, when Matthew says by himself, and here's the beauty of reading all four, he's not implying that Jesus is going off in a boat all alone with nobody else with him. He's implying and he's stating that he wants to get away from the crowd. He takes his own with him by himself. He's moving away from the masses that are constantly there, constantly pressing, constantly demanding. In fact, at this point in ministry, he had already sent the 12 out, chapter 10. A lot of chapter 11 and 12, the great invitation, 11. The great rejection, 12. That transitions into the parables, 13. He may indeed be doing these things while his disciples are out and about. We see them periodically, especially at the end. The other accounts show them at this point really coming back. They're telling him what was going on, what they did. He empowered them to do it. And they're all tired. They all need to get away. They all want to move and go somewhere a bit more desolate. Now, desolate, don't think desert. This is just a remote area. The word is wilderness. Sometimes it's desert. It's springtime. It's Passover, so it's a grassy area. It's away from people, the villages, the crowd. Now, it says he goes from there. We really don't know where he was coming from. That's interesting in this context when you look at a map of the Lake Gennesaret, the Sea of Galilee, Sea of Tiberias. We call it a sea, but it's a lake. If you've had the privilege of being there or looking at it or look at it in pictures, you can see across it, especially east and west, from the left to the right here. We think he's coming from somewhere. Most people say Tiberias. The last time Matthew shows him, he's in Nazareth, his hometown, where they rejected him. Nazareth is east, southeast from Tiberias. He's going across the lake. Maybe he's coming from Gennesaret. Some even think Capernaum, but we know where he's heading. He's heading to Bethsaida, which we don't know exactly today where it was. There's a lot of debate about the location of Bethsaida. It was home. It was where Peter and Andrew, brothers, grew up. It's where Philip is from. Remember Philip. We'll see him again in a second. Luke tells us they were heading to the area of Bethsaida, northeast on the lake. This is a Jewish area, not a Gentile. There are two feeding miracles in Scripture. The Jew first, and then the Gentile. This is the Jewish crowd. And so he moves and he goes, and Matthew writes, but when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. You got to picture this. He's in a boat. His intent was to get away from them. And they're on the shore, and they're watching the boat go from wherever he's coming from, and they're doing one of these. Where are you going? Wherever you're going, I'm going to be there. And they're making their way around the lake so that when he lands, guess what? Welcome. You must understand this, that they're following him on purpose. The signs were clear. Jesus is no obscure little rabbi in some Jewish town. We have many secular writers, not the least of which is Josephus, that even makes reference to his miracles. He was a known quantity. And they were a crowd, and they followed him. The signs were clear. When John introduces this scene, after this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, different name, and a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. They knew what he was doing. They were watching him, and he was doing things that verified his identity. He's the one. He's the prophet that Moses talked about. He's the one. The signs were clear, and they moved, and verse 14, and when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. Can you imagine if the very purpose you get in a boat with your guys is to get away from this group, and then you move your way to the other side of the lake, and there they are waiting for you? What do you do then? I'm getting back in the boat. You guys get out of here. I'm tired. I'm pressed. I need some time. I need some time alone. And he doesn't look at them and say, go away. He looks at them and heals them. He looks at them with compassion. He looks at them and he begins to do things that he's always done to help them because they're hurting and they're messed up. Mark uses the phrase in the scene. Matthew's already used it. When he went ashore, he saw this great crowd. He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. I love that phrase. And he began to teach them many things, and he was healing their sick, and he ministered to them. He didn't get ashore and say, "Get out of here. I'm done." They were like sheep without a shepherd. You should think deeply on that phrase. Sheep without a shepherd are undirected. They're vulnerable. They don't know where they're going. They're unprotected, undirected, and at any moment, who knows what their life is going to be filled with. They do their own thing. Why? They don't have a shepherd. I brought us into a gospel after our crisis on purpose, that I might show you and me again who Jesus is. Because if you're going to follow him, you must be like him. He loves the hurting. He ministers to people. He's kind and gentle and compassionate. And when he runs into someone doing their own thing, "I'm the master of my soul." We got a lot of that in our culture. His response isn't to shake his fist. He loves them. He loves them. There's two people in this scene: the sheep with no shepherd and the sheep in the boat, which are his. They're his. And the issue is whether you're still wandering the shores, waiting to find out, who am I going to follow in this life? He keeps calling. Or you're already with him, and now your goal is to be like him. There's lessons all over this. Now the lesson for his own. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and they said, "This is a desolate place." Think remote, think way far away from anything going on. "This is a desolate place," they said to him, "and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." Are you serious? Are we talking 20,000 people here? And he looks at the 12 of them and says, "Listen." And they're looking at him saying, "Listen, send this group away. We're remote. They need to go get something to eat." And he says, "You give them something to eat. They don't need to go away. You do it." Now, the beauty of having this in all four Gospels is you can develop the conversation and the dialogue, because this is not all that was said. And you can piece together a flow. You might be a little wrong on who said what first, but there's way more going on here than just these two little, a question and a response. Send them away, you give them something. In fact, John records, and I think this was the first thing out of his mouth, that he looks at Philip, who was from that area. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus says to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread so that all these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little bite." Philip. I love this. I laugh. You could develop personalities. Matthew, the tax collector. Peter, the one who loves to speak first. James and John, the sons of thunder. Philip, if there was an engineer in the group, it was Philip. I mean that. He's got the only Greek name among the 12. He's a Jew, but there's a suggestion that he brings some Greco with him, Greco-Roman background. He's a calculator. When he chases down Nathanael, he says to him, "Come and see, come and see." Thomas was the doubter. Philip, he wants one more data point. And then he'll call it. 200 days' wages, a denarii. Isn't enough. Thanks for the calculation, Philip. Jesus, how are we going to feed all these people? Philip, forget about it. He was part Italian too. Forget about it. It ain't going to happen. When Philip encounters Jesus after Jesus reveals himself as the way, the truth, and the life, John 14. No one comes to the Father except through me. Philip pipes up and says, just show us the Father, and that'll be enough. It's never enough for Philip. He wants one more piece, and then he'll make up his mind about who Jesus is. Of course, he was Jesus's, but it takes a while to learn, you know. Philip, how are we going to feed all these people? How much is enough? Philip's thinking natural, and he's thinking, we can't do this. This can't be done. Jesus pokes first. Philip responds. Then I think the 12 say, send these guys away. No, don't send them away. You give them something. They're at an impasse now. Because God has just called them to do something that there's no possible natural way that they're able to do it. He's trying to evoke something, provoke something, teach something in your mind, in your heart, in their minds, in their hearts, as to what they're going to do when they're faced with something they cannot do. And get this, he brought it on their plate. You feed them. You do it. We can't do this. It's not natural. That's the point here. You better take away. This isn't natural. This is a teaching test. He knew what he was doing, but he wanted to see their response. And immediately you would conclude that this is not possible. It's not natural. I don't know. What do you want me to say? How do you want me to respond to this? I mean, at some point, one of them looks for how much food they have. We'll see that here in a second. It ain't enough, Philip. It's not enough. I'll say this. I've heard it said. You ought to own this one. It's a good saying. If you don't have something going on in your life that you're leveraging for the glory of God, that if God doesn't show up, it's not going to happen, chances are good you're not doing what he's telling you to be doing. Listen very carefully. If you, Christian, follower of Christ, if you don't have something going on in your life that if God doesn't show up, it's dead. I do this. If he doesn't show up, this is a bust. I mean that. If you're not praying for someone to come to know Christ, and you know, be certain of this, if God doesn't show up, it isn't going to happen. If you don't have something like that going on in your life, you're not pressing like God wants you to press. Not for your own glory. No, I'm trying to get to $1 million, God. Show up. Whose glory is that? He's talking about pressing for him. You do this. This is a directive. You give them something to eat. Can't do this. That ain't going to happen here. 17, they said to him, we have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish. We see from the account that he actually tells them, go and look to see what you have. And they come back and say, this is what we've got here. 5, in fact, John tells us they're barley loaves. That was the cheapest bread you could have. They aren't even good bread. It's not wheat. Barley bread and 2 small fish. A boy was carrying it around. They speak of it like it's theirs, and it may well have been. Maybe this was one of their sons. Wouldn't that have been fun if it was Philip's kid? What do you got? That's what I got. There's an incredible lesson here that you better be asking yourself, what is it that God gave you? And he's looking to see what you've got. And your answer is probably going to be this: a little. I just got a little. That's all I have. Got 5 cheap pieces of bread. A loaf, think a pita loaf. Not a good old Italian loaf of bread. These are little Jewish loaves. Barley loaves and 2 fish. Show me what you got. You better see God calling you to do something that's absolutely impossible. And then he asks the question, what do you have in your hand? And you need to answer it for him. Because chances are good the thing that you have isn't enough to do what he's told you to do. That's almost certain. That's a guarantee here for sure. You don't have enough. You don't have enough strength to get through the thing that you're going through right now. That's probably true. You don't have enough self-control to keep yourself from falling in pride, in envy, in lust, in greed. You don't have enough. It's impossible. You don't have enough strength to do what I'm asking you to do. Man, I run into that one all the time. I prayed with someone just this week. She'd been terrible, terrible pain for years now. And she's done. It's so hard. It's like, God, I want to just take me. I don't want to, I can't go through this anymore. She's done. She won't be the first one in the Bible to have prayed that God take her home. Jeremiah, I want to die, God. I'm done with this. You don't have enough. That's the setup for this. You have the equivalent of 5 cheap loaves of bread and 2 little fish. That's what you got. And maybe the most important aspect of the entire story, only Matthew actually records Jesus saying. Verse 18, and he said to them, bring them here to me. That's the underlined verse. Hint, hint. What do you have? I got next to nothing. We don't have enough. You've asked us to do something that's not possible. This is what we've got. And then he says, bring it to me. Bring it here. If that isn't the most fundamental teaching point that's going on here, then we're not paying attention to what he's trying to teach them. They clearly were not able to do what God is asking them to do. We clearly are not able to do what God asks us to do. It's not natural. He brings us into the supernatural. And Matthew records these words and says, listen, this is impossible unless you bring it to me. He could have done this miracle a million different ways. Okay, God, bring the manna. This is quite a crowd. Let's do it that way. He could have started from nothing. He did that in Genesis 1. He takes their little and starts with that. Only when they bring it to him at his request, at his command. Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and he said a blessing. And then he broke the loaves and he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowd. He takes this, he thanks his Father for how God provides, and then he starts doling it out. Now, you don't catch this, and we don't do it well in the English, but the verb tense is spectacular when it's recorded. Mark records it particularly. Mark chapter 6, where this is recorded, refers to what's going on here like this. He gave thanks, and he broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before the people. It's an imperfect tense. It is not a one and done. You have to imagine them going to him. He's breaking some up, putting it in a basket. They run off and they dole it out to all these people that are sitting in 50s and 100s. And they're like, oh, I'm done. I'm going some more. And they go back to him and he fills them up again. And then they go and they give it to them. What a scene. I mean, if you're sitting in one of the groups and you happen to be that way far out, you ever go to a wedding reception and you're like the last table called? I hate that. And you're looking and you're thinking, especially when it's a buffet, man, I like some of those. There's not going to be any left. First world problems. Imagine what's on their faces. How long before they learn that they go get from him to give to them. And then when they're out, they get from him and give to them again and again and again. He kept giving it to them so they could give it back out. Faith is a constant, active dependence upon God. If it's not faith. Faith moves in such a way that it's constantly moving and going back to God for dependence. You cannot do what God asked you to do if you don't go back to him again and get more. I need more, God. I barely have enough for today. I need more tomorrow. Give us today our daily bread. Why did he say it that way? Because tomorrow you need to ask again. That's faith. That's dependence. That's God. That's the teaching lesson here. That God provides all that you're going to need. And he gives us, especially when we're pouring out to other people. That's what's going on here. They're feeding them from him. Especially when you're pouring out and you're giving. I don't have enough to serve in this capacity. I don't have enough to give here. I don't have enough to come back. I'll give you some more. And I'll give it to you as long as you need. Augustine is famous for the saying, God, ask for whatever you will, but provide for whatever you ask for. Wow, what a quote. Ask anything you want of me. Give me what I need to do it. Whew, you get that worked out in your life. You've got something going. Peter makes this comment. You should think this through in what he says. He says, if anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength that God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. God, I don't have the words. I have just enough for today. And he says, come back tomorrow, I'll give you more. I don't have enough to serve. Come back and I'll give you strength to do it again. Again and again and again. That's the lesson here for them. And man, they are slow to learn. Good thing we learn quicker than they do. We are so slow to learn this. How quick we say, I can't do this. I can't, this is impossible. I can't, forget this. It's not going to work. And look what happens in the midst of all this. Great abundance. And they all ate, verse 20, and they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. Are you kidding me? 5 little loaves, 2 fish, and I end up with 12 baskets? What kind of math is that? 12 basketfuls of leftover pieces parts. And listen, the numbers are significant in their symbolism. 5 plus 2, 7. I think that's no mistake here. That is a completion totality number. 12, the number of men. It was always 6 times 2, 12. It was always reflective of a group of people. This is Israel he's feeding. They, 12 of them, feeding the 12 and left over 12 baskets of bread. John has Jesus saying when they collected the baskets so that none may be lost. There's more going on here than bread. This is him teaching them to minister to them. And he equips and empowers, and they had their full. Everyone was satisfied. John actually writes that everybody had all that they could eat. And we had 12 baskets left over. When I asked Kali to send me data on the backpacks, I swear this was not contrived. And he said, we did all these backpacks. I said, because I want to tell them about it. This will be so good. And then he said, we had 12 boxes of supplies left over. I'm telling you, I read that email and I go, ooh. Like, where'd that come from? That's weird. But God's weird that way. Yeah, I'm reading this text. All this is going on, and God provides, and he provides with such abundance. I love this, and Paul prays it with the Ephesian church. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us. That's the abundant God, and there's a promise to do his work, his goal, his thing, to give you more than you need, though you may have to go back for it day after day after day. And he will give it in abundance. This whole miracle ends on a very odd note. Only John records the odd note. That when the people saw what had just transpired, they go, oh my goodness, what's going on here? When the people saw that sign that he had just done, they said, this is indeed the prophet. It's a reference to Deuteronomy, Moses' words. This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Wow. Isn't that amazing? They were ready to make him king. Why? Just filled my belly, man. I'll take that every day. Let's make you the king. John chapter 6 is the greatest loss of disciples in Scripture over the issue of Jesus and him only and eating of him. And they can't take it and they leave him. How quickly we want to say, God, I'll follow you when you fill my belly. Let's make you king. And he runs from them, pushes his disciples into a boat, and walks away. They chase him down again. Look at the scene and what he says to them. It's the closure to this in a very real way. When they found him again on the other side of the sea now, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? And Jesus answered them, Truly, truly I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has set his seal. And then they said to him, What must we do to be doing the works of God? And Jesus answers them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. Don't chase bread. Chase God. He'll give you what you need all the time. Because you can't do it by yourself all the time. But he will provide. And he'll be the great king that he is. And you've accepted him as so.